Molly, your new piece of Vanity Fair is titled, "Donald Trump's Dictator Promise is No Joke." In it, Molly writes, quote, "Over the past week, Donald Trump promised to be a dictator on 2 different occasions. Sadly, that's not a completely unexpected sentence to write, given that he and his allies have not been shy about planning an authoritarian second term, from installing MAGA loyalists throughout the government to using the Department of Justice to target political enemies." Fox News host Sean Hannity, who first blamed the media for focusing on a scary second-term agenda, asked, "Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody?" Trump responded, quote, "Except for day one," end quote. "We find ourselves," Molly writes, "at a precipice, with Trump making his autocratic tendencies crystal clear. The news media needs to take him literally and seriously, especially as his anti-democratic impulses have infected the rest of the party. Republicans have purged those in their ranks who have sided with democracy over Trump, like Liz Cheney, who's now sounding the alarms while elevating an election denier like Mike Johnson to Speaker of the House. It is time for the media to warn voters of the stakes of this election, one of which is whether there will still be Democratic elections." So, something we've been focused on for the last several weeks here on this show. The Atlantic has had its series of pieces saying, hey, this is what a second term would look like. And I do think most people understand that in 2016, he couldn't do all the things he was claiming he was going to do. He's just being brash. He's being Donald Trump for The Apprentice. We like that he's going to shake things up. Now he's got a record to run on, and now he's on the record promising it will be worse. From his own lips, he's promising it will be worse.
Yeah, and he has institutional backing now, right? He has the Heritage Foundation saying they're going to fire all government employees, not all government employees, but they're going to try to remake the government in ways that we hadn't even sort of dreamed of. The thing I'm so struck by is it feels like the mainstream media is addicted to giving Trump the benefit of the doubt, right? We saw in 2016 that a lot of the stuff he wanted to do, the autocratic stuff, he just couldn't do because he wasn't able to, right? He didn't understand how government worked. This time, he's taken 4 years off, and he's really got allies that are very smart and know how government works. And you see his plans. I mean, the stuff they're saying already, this is the stuff they're advertising, is really scary. So imagine what they're not advertising.
And, Caddy, we're already seeing, once again, some of Trump's allies try to cushion what he's saying. Oh, he didn't mean it like that. We had that from former Speaker McCarthy over the weekend, suggesting that, that Trump wouldn't actually follow through with this. New Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday was asked about this and said that he did not believe Trump would be a dictator. Of course, we wouldn't participate in that. But we have seen time and again Republicans do embolden him. Why would any of us think that it would be any different next time around if Trump were to take office again, free of having to face voters again, and also completely unchecked, where he could say, I've been impeached twice, I was indicted on 91 counts, and yet I still won.
So, we know that there's a history of Trump supporters saying that we tend to take things that he says too seriously, and it was just a joke, and where's the sense of humor of his critics? But actually, when you have conversations, and I know you do, John, as well, with the Trump campaign, and I've had several, when you ask them what a Trump second term would be like, they're pretty clear about it. I mean, they do want to radically change, for example, the Department of Justice, perhaps one of the most important bastions in terms of guarding the rule of law of any democracy, and they want to bring that much more into the purview of the White House. They want to seek retribution against those who have, they believe, in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party, who have attacked the former president, they say, and they want to take action against members of the press who they say have been too critical. So all of those, you look at the model of Hungary and Viktor Orban, you see echoes of all of that, and they're pretty frank about it. So, Molly, when you talk to the Trump campaign and they're honest about what they want to do and they're pretty clear about it, and you hear members of the Republican Party saying, well, we're just, we shouldn't take any of that seriously. Where's the disconnect there? Because the Trump campaign is pretty clear about what they want to do.
Yeah, I don't understand how they're still getting the benefit of the doubt when it's so clear what they want to do and they're advertising it. It's just very strange. And I think, look, Traditional mainstream straight media wants to normalize things. They don't want to look like they're being hysterical, right? The worst thing you want, especially when you're sort of a straight news reporter as opposed to being on the opinion side, that you don't want to look like you're being partisan or overreacting or, making it too much about your own point of view. But clearly, we need to be focused on the restoration and the continuation of democracy. And that is not a partisan issue.
And Mika, to hear people like Kevin McCarthy and Speaker Mike Johnson sort of wave away these questions we talk about every day on this show, which, he's not really going to try to be an authoritarian. He already did. He tried to overturn the 2020 election. And how did he do it? With the help of the very people who are claiming, he would never do that. So his friends already in many ways are in place. And if he loses the 2024 election, you better believe that Speaker Mike Johnson, a constitutional lawyer who helped to push the overturning of the 2020 election, will be back at it again.
I mean, there are facts now to prove that his jokes and his intonations and his touching on things end up being 100% true. So it's worth believing him.